When a woman matches a man's distance, the very first thing that happens inside his mind is awareness, even if he never says it out loud. Men are observant by nature, but we often pretend we're not, especially when it comes to emotions. A man might act unbothered, distracted, or busy, but the truth is this: the moment the rhythm changes, he feels it. When the texts slow down, when the check-ins disappear, when the emotional availability he was used to suddenly stops flowing toward him, something in his mind clicks. He may not label it immediately, but his nervous system notices the absence before his ego does. At first, his mind tries to rationalize it. He tells himself you're busy, that you're tired, that nothing has changed. Men like explanations that protect their comfort, but when the pattern continues, when the silence isn't broken the way it used to be, when you don't rush in to fill the space anymore, awareness sharpens. He realizes this isn't accidental, this isn't temporary, this is different. And that awareness disrupts the unconscious assumption that you'll always be there in the same way. Most men don't wake up thinking about control, but comfort quietly becomes control over time. When a woman consistently shows up emotionally, initiates communication, checks in, reassures, and stays connected, even when the man pulls back, he begins to expect it without asking for it. Not because he's malicious, but because humans adapt quickly to what's freely given. So when you match his distance, you interrupt that adaptation. His mind suddenly loses the familiar signal it depended on, and awareness sets in like a cold room he didn't know he was standing in. That awareness doesn't arrive gently. It shows up as restlessness. He checks his phone more often than usual. He notices the lack of notifications. He rereads the last messages. He wonders why the energy feels off. Men may not always articulate their feelings, but their behavior changes when awareness kicks in. He might scroll through old conversations, look at your social media, or casually mention you in his thoughts without realizing why. Your absence becomes present in his mind. What's important here is that this awareness isn't created by confrontation, arguments, or emotional explanation. It's created by silence and consistency. Matching his distance works because it doesn't accuse him of anything. It simply mirrors his behavior. And a mirror is uncomfortable when you're forced to see yourself clearly. When you stop doing more than he's doing, his mind becomes aware of the imbalance that used to work in his favor. This awareness also challenges his self-image. Most men like to believe they're good guys. They don't want to see themselves as neglectful or emotionally unavailable. When you pull back, his mind starts asking questions that threaten that image. Was I not showing up? Did I take her for granted? Did I misread how patient she was? These questions don't come all at once, but they creep in during quiet moments, late at night, while driving, when something reminds him of you. Awareness grows in the spaces where distraction fades. Another layer of awareness comes from comparison. He notices how other interactions feel different. Conversations feel flatter. Attention from others doesn't carry the same weight. He becomes aware that your energy wasn't generic, it was specific. And now that it's gone, the difference is noticeable. Men often don't realize the emotional value of a woman until they experience life without her presence in the same way. Matching his distance removes the emotional cushion he didn't know he was leaning on. This awareness doesn't immediately turn into action. That's an important truth. Awareness is a mental shift, not a promise of change. But it is the doorway. Before awareness, a man operates on autopilot. After awareness, every choice becomes conscious. When you stop initiating, he becomes aware of who's really carrying the connection. When you stop explaining yourself, he becomes aware of how much emotional labor you were doing. When you stop chasing clarity, he becomes aware of how much uncertainty you tolerated. And here's where it gets deeper. Awareness introduces vulnerability, and vulnerability makes men uncomfortable. so his mind may resist it. He may delay reaching out. He may convince himself that you'll come back around. He may test the silence to see how long it lasts. But underneath that resistance is the undeniable awareness that something has shifted. The balance has changed. The dynamic is no longer predictable. What makes this awareness powerful is that it doesn't depend on your words. Words can be debated. Silence cannot. You matching his distance forces his mind to supply its own meaning. And people always assume responsibility when they are left alone with their thoughts. Without your emotional presence smoothing things over, his mind fills the gaps. And often, it fills them with self-reflection, whether he wants it or not. This is why awareness is the first and most important mental shift. Without it, nothing else happens. Without awareness, there is no effort, no realization, no fear of loss. Awareness is the spark. And matching his distance lights it quietly but effectively. You don't announce your absence. You don't threaten to leave. You simply stop overgiving. And his mind wakes up to the reality that access to you was never guaranteed. There's also a subtle respect that begins to form at this stage. Even if he doesn't admit it, he recognizes strength and restraint. A woman who doesn't chase when the energy isn't returned signals emotional maturity. His awareness includes the realization that you are not desperate, not dependent, and not waiting on his inconsistency. That recognition shifts how he sees you. You move from someone who is always available to someone who has standards, boundaries, and self-worth. Awareness also removes illusion. If he cared deeply, he becomes aware of how close he is to losing something meaningful. If he didn't, he becomes aware that the connection was convenient rather than essential. Either way, clarity emerges. And clarity, even when uncomfortable, is valuable. Matching his distance doesn't guarantee a specific outcome, but it guarantees truth. And truth is always better than prolonged confusion. When a man becomes aware through distance, his mind can no longer hide behind habit. He is forced to confront the change, the silence, and his role in creating it. Awareness is the moment where emotional fog lifts. It's the moment he realizes that your presence was a choice, not an obligation. And once a man understands that, the dynamic is never the same again. When silence enters a connection and a woman matches a man's distance, the next thing that happens inside his mind is pressure. Not loud pressure, not dramatic pressure, but quiet pressure that builds because comfort has been removed. Men operate best when life feels predictable. When communication follows a familiar rhythm, when emotional access feels guaranteed, when there's no urgency to act. Matching his distance takes that predictability away. And in its place appears a question he can't ignore. What am I going to do now? At first, he enjoys the space. This part is important to understand. Men often pull back because they feel overwhelmed, distracted, or simply accustomed to having someone available without effort. When you match his distance, he may initially interpret it as relief. He tells himself everything is fine. He focuses on work, hobbies, or distractions. He assumes the connection is on pause, not at risk. But silence has weight, and over time, that weight becomes noticeable. As the days pass, pressure begins to rise because nothing fills the space the way your presence did. He starts realizing that the silence isn't neutral. It's directional. It's moving somewhere, and he doesn't know where. That uncertainty creates internal tension. Men don't like not knowing where they stand. Even emotionally reserved men want clarity even if they don't ask for it directly. When you stop offering reassurance, stop initiating, stop smoothing over gaps, his mind starts working harder than it used to. This pressure forces decision-making. Before, he could drift. He could show up inconsistently and still maintain access to you. Now, drifting has consequences. Every hour that passes without contact feels like a choice, even if he didn't consciously make it. And that's what creates discomfort. Silence becomes a mirror reflecting his inaction back at him. The longer he waits, the louder the question becomes, am I okay with losing this? Men often delay decisions when there's no immediate cost. Matching his distance introduces cost without confrontation. The cost is emotional distance, uncertainty, and the risk of replacement. Even if he doesn't consciously think someone else might step in, his instincts pick up on it. A woman who stops chasing signals independence. Independence signals options. Options introduce competition. And competition activates urgency in the male mind. As pressure builds, he begins to test the silence. He may send a casual message, react to a story, or drop a low-effort check-in just to see if you're still there. This isn't always courage. Sometimes it's fear management. He wants to know if the door is still open. Your response, or lack of it, feeds the pressure. If you respond calmly without overinvesting, the pressure remains. If you don't respond immediately, the pressure intensifies. He realizes he no longer controls the tempo. This is where many men experience internal conflict. One part of him wants to reach out fully, to reestablish connection, to feel grounded again. Another part of him resists because effort requires vulnerability. Effort means admitting he might have miscalculated. Effort means risking rejection. So his mind goes back and forth, weighing pride against loss. Matching his distance doesn't force him to act, but it removes his ability to avoid the choice indefinitely. Pressure also reveals priorities. When something truly matters to a man, pressure sharpens his focus. He finds time. He becomes intentional. When something doesn't matter as much, pressure leads to withdrawal instead of action. This is why matching his distance is so clarifying. It doesn't manipulate behavior, it exposes intention. His response to the pressure tells you everything about where you stand. What makes this pressure effective is that it's self-generated. You didn't demand clarity. You didn't issue ultimatums. You didn't create drama. The pressure comes from his own thoughts, his own awareness of risk, his own fear of regret. Self-generated pressure is far more powerful than external pressure because it can't be blamed on someone else. He can't say you're asking for too much. He can only confront what he's willing or unwilling to do. As time goes on, the pressure shifts from curiosity to urgency. He starts imagining life without you in it. He wonders how permanent the silence is. He imagines you moving on, becoming emotionally unavailable to him the way he once was to you. These thoughts aren't always conscious, but they influence his behavior. He might become restless, distracted, or unusually reflective. Pressure doesn't always look dramatic from the outside, but internally it changes how he thinks. There's also a subtle fear that arises, the fear of misjudgment. Men pride themselves on being logical decision makers. When a woman matches his distance and doesn't chase, it challenges his assumptions. He thought he had time. He thought the connection was secure. Now he realizes he may have been wrong. That realization stings because it means he underestimated you. And underestimating a woman who chooses herself creates discomfort that lingers. Pressure also removes fantasy. When you were present and consistent, he could imagine the connection continuing without effort. Distance collapses that fantasy. Reality sets in. Relationships require intention. Connection requires presence. And now he has to decide whether he's willing to provide it. Pressure forces alignment between feelings and actions. He can no longer rely on potential or assumptions. For some men, this pressure becomes the catalyst for growth. They step up. They communicate clearly. They show consistency because they realize the cost of not doing so is losing you. For others, the pressure exposes avoidance. They pull away further, not because they don't feel it, but because they aren't willing to meet it. In both cases, pressure serves a purpose. It brings truth to the surface. Matching his distance is powerful because it shifts the emotional labor back where it belongs. You stop carrying the weight of the connection alone. He feels that shift immediately. Pressure replaces comfort, and comfort is the enemy of effort. When a man feels comfortable, he coasts. When comfort disappears, he has to choose direction. What's often misunderstood is that pressure doesn't mean panic. A man can feel pressure quietly internally without showing it. He may still appear calm. He may still take time, but the internal process has changed. Every delay is now a decision. Every silence is now meaningful. That's the power of matching his distance. It turns passivity into responsibility. And the most important truth is this: pressure doesn't guarantee he will choose you, but it guarantees he will reveal himself. You don't lose by matching his distance, you gain clarity. If he values you, pressure pushes him forward. If he doesn't, pressure pushes him out of the way. Either outcome moves you closer to a connection that matches your effort instead of draining it. When silence forces a decision, you reclaim your power without saying a word. You stop waiting. You stop guessing. You let the pressure do what conversations often can't. And whatever he chooses under that, pressure tells you exactly where you stand. When a woman matches a man's distance, after awareness sets in and pressure begins to build, the next major shift inside his mind is reflection. This is the stage where silence stops being just absence and starts becoming a conversation he's having with himself. Reflection doesn't happen immediately because men are very good at distraction. Work, routines, social media, friends, and daily responsibilities act as noise that keeps deeper thoughts away. But silence has a way of slipping through cracks. It shows up late at night, during quiet drives, in moments when there's nothing demanding his attention. That's when reflection begins. At first, reflection feels uncomfortable because it removes excuses. When you were still reaching out, explaining, forgiving, and maintaining emotional closeness, his mind didn't need to look backward. Everything felt intact. Now that you've matched his distance, the present feels incomplete, and the mind naturally searches the past to understand why. He starts replaying moments he didn't give enough attention to, conversations he brushed off, times you showed care when he gave minimal effort. Reflection forces him to see the pattern, not just isolated moments. What's powerful about this stage is that it's involuntary. You didn't ask him to think about you. You didn't demand self-examination. The mind does it on its own when something meaningful feels threatened. Men often don't process emotions while they're happening. They process them after the emotional supply is removed. Reflection is delayed awareness catching up with reality. During reflection, he begins to separate presence from value. When you were always there, your consistency blended into the background of his life. It felt normal, familiar, expected. Now that it's gone, he's forced to evaluate what that presence actually contributed. Emotional safety, support, encouragement, stability, listening, belief in him. Reflection turned invisible labor into visible loss. He realizes that what he thought was effortless was actually something you were choosing to give. This stage also confronts him with contrast. He compares how things feel now versus how they felt when you were fully present. The contrast isn't just about missing conversation, it's about missing how he felt around you. Calm, understood, accepted, motivated. Reflection isn't always about love at first. Often it's about the loss of emotional regulation that came from your presence. And that realization can be unsettling. Reflection also brings guilt for some men. Not dramatic guilt, but quiet recognition. He might think, she was patient with me, or she didn't ask for much, or I could have done better. These thoughts don't always lead to action, but they reshape how he remembers the connection. You are no longer someone who was just there. You become someone who gave. And giving creates weight in memory. At the same time, reflection challenges his ego. Men like to believe they're fair, reasonable, and emotionally aware. When he reflects and sees moments where he avoided effort, delay, commitment, or took you for granted, it creates internal tension. His self-image conflicts with his behavior. This tension can go two ways. Either he grows and takes responsibility, or he protects his ego by minimizing the connection. But even minimization is a form of reflection. It means the experience mattered enough to justify. Reflection also introduces the fear of regret. Regret doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. What if I misread her? What if I assume too much? What if I don't get another chance? These questions don't come from panic. They come from awareness combined with time. Distance gives regret room to grow because there's no immediate reassurance to silence it. Another important part of reflection is that he starts to understand your silence differently. At first, he may have thought you were reacting emotionally. Now, with time, he begins to see restraint. He realizes you didn't explode, beg, or demand. You simply stopped overgiving. That realization reframes you in his mind. You become emotionally mature, not dramatic, strong, not reactive. And that shift often increases respect, even if it comes with discomfort. Reflection also makes him aware of effort and balance. Men don't always notice when a woman is carrying the emotional weight because it feels smooth. When she stops, the imbalance becomes obvious. He reflects on who initiated conversations, who checked in, who tried to maintain closeness. This can be a humbling realization because it exposes dependency he didn't acknowledge. He may not have chased you, but he relied on you. As reflection deepens, he begins to imagine alternate outcomes. What if he had shown up more? What if he had communicated better? What if he had acted sooner? These imagined scenarios aren't about fantasy, they're about missed opportunity. And missed opportunity carries emotional weight. Even men who struggle with vulnerability feel this weight internally. Reflection is also the stage where meaning forms. Before, the connection might have felt casual or undefined. Distance forces definition. He begins to assign meaning to what you were in his life, because now there's a possibility that you won't be there anymore. Meaning is created by loss more often than by presence. And once meaning is assigned, the connection changes permanently in his mind. It's important to understand that reflection doesn't guarantee reconciliation or pursuit. Some men reflect and realize they aren't ready or willing to meet the level of effort required. But even in that case, reflection gives you clarity. It means the connection ends with understanding instead of confusion. You're no longer questioning your worth or wondering what you did wrong. His reflection replaces your self-doubt. For men who truly cared but became complacent, reflection becomes the turning point. It's where emotional truth overrides habit. It's where he stops seeing you as someone who will always be there and starts seeing you as someone he could lose. That shift can lead to intentional action, deeper communication, and renewed effort. But even when it doesn't, reflection still serves its purpose. Matching his distance gives him the space to reflect without interference. You don't interrupt his thoughts with explanations. You don't soften the consequences with reassurance. You let silence do the teaching. Reflection born from silence is honest because it isn't influenced by persuasion or pressure. It comes from within. And that's why this stage matters so much. Reflection is where reality settles in. It's where illusions fade. It's where he understands that your presence was a choice, not a guarantee. Once a man reaches this stage, whether he steps forward or steps away, he is no longer operating blindly. He knows what he had, what he lost, and what it would take to get it back. When a woman matches a man's distance, after awareness sets in, pressure builds, and reflection begins. The final mental shift that occurs in his mind is evaluation. Evaluation is deeper than reflection because it moves from looking inward to measuring the connection and assessing value. Men are practical by nature, and their minds constantly seek to assign worth to relationships, actions, and emotional investment. When you stop overextending, stop initiating, stop smoothing over gaps, he is forced to ask himself questions he may have been avoiding. How much does this relationship mean to me? How much effort am I willing to put in? What am I willing to risk losing? This evaluation doesn't happen through words or confrontation. It happens in silence, in the empty spaces where your presence used to be, and it's relentless. Evaluation begins with an honest inventory of his actions versus yours. Men often operate under the assumption that things will balance themselves out or that their own contributions are enough. But when a woman matches his distance, the imbalance is exposed. He can no longer rely on your overgiving to mask his lack of effort. He starts comparing how much emotional energy, time, and consistency he invested against what she consistently gave. That inventory can be sobering, especially for men who have taken your presence for granted without realizing the magnitude of what you contributed. This internal audit of behavior and effort is not always pleasant. It can feel like an uncomfortable mirror reflecting his own shortcomings. During evaluation, he also begins to consider consequences. Men weigh outcomes pragmatically. The absence of your emotional labor forces him to ask, consciously or unconsciously, what he stands to lose. Every unanswered message, every delayed reply, every moment of silence becomes data for his mental calculation. He starts imagining life without you, not as a hypothetical, but as a potential reality. And when he contemplates the possibility of losing a woman who cared for him, who supported him, and who consistently showed up, that realization carries weight. Men don't like the feeling of scarcity, especially when it comes to someone who has been reliably generous with their time and heart. As evaluation deepens, he measures the emotional and practical value you brought into his life. He recalls the moments you encouraged him, stood by him, and made his life easier. He notices the little things he may have dismissed at the time, messages that brightened his day, conversations that calmed his anxiety, laughter that made him feel understood. This stage makes him realize that your presence wasn't just convenient, it was enriching. Men are more aware of tangible benefits than abstract emotions, so he begins cataloging the real impact you had. He assesses not just the love, support, or companionship, but also the stability and balance you contributed. Evaluation also intersects with priority. Once he sees what he stands to lose, he begins to ask himself where you rank in his life. This isn't always a conscious calculation, but it's incredibly accurate. Men measure commitment by effort and sacrifice. When a woman stops matching the energy he used to take for granted, it forces him to decide, is this person important enough for me to step up consistently? Am I willing to invest the time, attention, and emotional energy required to maintain this connection? Evaluation is about alignment. If his feelings and priorities don't match your value, the disparity becomes clear. At this stage, men also confront authenticity. The absence of overgiving removes pretense. He sees your choice to stop chasing as a demonstration of self-respect and independence. That clarity forces him to evaluate not just the connection, but his own intentions and capacity. Does he truly want you, or did he merely enjoy the comfort of your presence? This self-assessment is crucial because it strips away illusions. Men who were inconsistent or complacent can no longer hide behind habitual patterns. Evaluation requires honesty, and honesty brings truth to the surface. Another element of evaluation is emotional cost. Men assess how much emotional energy they are willing to invest relative to what is required to sustain the connection. When you match his distance, he realizes the relationship demands more from him than he initially acknowledged. The effort needed is now visible because your support isn't filling in the gaps. He has to confront questions like, am I prepared to get consistently? Can I handle a partnership where my actions matter as much as my words? This stage measures capability and willingness. Evaluation also engages foresight. Men begin projecting outcomes based on their current behavior. If he decides not to act, he envisions what losing you would feel like, the regret it might bring, and the gap it would leave in his life. If he chooses to engage, he anticipates the effort required to rebuild trust, consistency, and closeness. This projection forces him to weigh risk versus reward. He becomes acutely aware that time lost cannot be reclaimed and that second chances are rarely infinite. Evaluation forces accountability. As the mind goes deeper, he assesses long-term compatibility. It's not just about desire or attraction anymore, it's about sustainability. He asks himself whether he is capable of matching your boundaries, valuing your presence, and reciprocating consistently. Matching distance exposes whether he can rise to meet the standard you've silently set. Men who are serious start to recognize that you are not just testing him, but demonstrating what a balanced, self-respecting partnership looks like. Evaluation leads to the realization that if he wants to be part of your life meaningfully, he must act in alignment with your value. Evaluation also interacts with reputation and pride. A man may recognize, consciously or subconsciously, that failing to respond appropriately under these circumstances could reflect poorly on his character, not just in your eyes, but in how he sees himself. Pride doesn't always motivate men immediately, but when combined with awareness, reflection, and pressure, it strengthens the push to act. He evaluates whether his behavior aligns with the kind of man he wants to be perceived as reliable, emotionally mature, and capable of honoring a meaningful connection. During this stage, he also begins to consider alternatives. The absence of your overinvestment makes it clear that no one else is automatically filling the emotional role you once played. He measures whether he is willing to risk losing someone who offered consistency and depth in exchange for nothing more than effort on his part. Evaluation highlights scarcity. Your decision to match his distance forces him to recognize that quality connections are not limitless and that what is gone may not return. Finally, evaluation leads to decision-making. After awareness, pressure, and reflection, he has gathered enough information to form a judgment. He has seen the imbalance, experienced the pressure, replayed his actions, assessed the emotional and practical value of the relationship, considered his priorities, and projected outcomes. Evaluation crystallizes into clarity. He now knows whether he is willing to rise to the occasion, pursue intentionally, and honor the standards you've established, or whether he will continue on a path of inaction and risk losing you permanently. This stage is transformative for both parties, even silently. For you, matching his distance provides insight into his character, intentions, and ability to meet your standards. For him, evaluation strips away illusions, exposes gaps between desire and action, and forces accountability. It is the mental mechanism that converts passive awareness into conscious choice. It demonstrates the consequences of underestimating your presence and the rewards of recognizing your value. In the end, evaluation is about truth. It's about a man confronting not just what he wants, but what he is willing and capable of giving. Your choice to match his distance doesn't manipulate him. It simply sets a mirror before him, allowing the reflection of his priorities, intentions, and values to become unavoidable. It separates those who are genuinely invested from those who are not. It allows him to measure the relationship honestly, without your constant input or effort buffering him from reality. Evaluation is the ultimate test of alignment. And it is through this process that both parties gain clarity, respect, and the opportunity to cultivate a connection that truly honors mutual effort and self-worth.